Before we dive into today's story, drop a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Let's begin. The charity raffle had been Priya's idea. This was the first thing Naomi Chen had established with absolute certainty by the time she was standing outside Aurelius' restaurant on a Friday evening in a dress borrowed from her neighbor and heels that were delivering a precise, rhythmic punishment to the back of her left ankle. The dress was the color of a winter evening. The heels were objectively wrong. The situation, by any fair accounting, was entirely and specifically Priya Mehta's fault. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier. It landed in Naomi's inbox between a pitch rejection from an editor she had been courting for 18 months and a reminder that her streaming subscription was about to auto-renew for another year she would not fully use. It had the kind of elegant serif typography that preceded either something genuinely good or something she would describe later to close friends as a formative disaster. Congratulations! You have been selected as the winner of the Hearts and Horizons charity blind date experience. Your reservation is confirmed for Friday, 7 p.m., at Aurelius. Please dress for an evening of possibility. She had called Priya the moment she finished reading it. You entered me into a blind date raffle, Naomi said, without greeting. A charity blind date raffle, Priya corrected, with the cheerfulness of someone who believed enthusiasm was a perfectly sufficient substitute for consent. The proceeds support the Children's Arts Initiative, which is genuinely important work, and honestly, Naomi, when was the last time you went on a real date? Not a working dinner. A date. That is not the point. The point is that you are 27 years old. You eat lunch at your desk every single day. Your most consistent relationship is with the coffee machine in the break room that hisses at you whenever you press the wrong button, and you have begun to take the hissing personally. I've watched you. Naomi had not had a strong counterargument for this. She had looked around her studio apartment, the takeout containers, the half-finished draft of an article on non-profit fundraising structures, the 3 library books she'd had for 6 weeks beyond their due date, and felt, with the particular clarity that comes in very quiet moments, that perhaps the universe was being aggressive with its intervention. She had gone to the dinner. Standing outside Aurelius now, she understood mistake number 1, she had not researched the event. Aurelius was not the kind of restaurant where junior staff writers at digital magazines with precarious revenue models went on dates. It was the kind of restaurant that appeared in the architectural supplement of quarterly magazines, where the lighting had been designed by someone who understood that a specific shade of warm gold made everyone look like a slightly better and more interesting version of themselves. The air outside the entrance held the suggestion of wealth the way expensive candles held fragrance, present and deliberate without being named. The host looked up when she gave her name. Of course, he said, with a neutrality that implied she had been expected not merely as a raffle winner but specifically, as though the reservation had her dimensions built into it. Right this way. She followed him through rooms that smelled of black truffle and something older and more expensive that she could not name, past tables where people spoke at a volume that was not the absence of confidence but its most complete expression. The table was in the far corner. Private. 2 chairs, one already occupied. Naomi stopped. She stopped because she recognized the man sitting there, and recognition, in this context, felt like stepping onto a stair that was not there. Not primarily because he was handsome, though he was, with the particular undemonstrative handsomeness of someone who did not appear to consider it especially relevant. Not because of the stillness he carried, the ease of someone who was comfortable in rooms and did not require rooms to respond to him. She stopped because she had written about this man 3 times in the past 2 years. 2 full features and 1 shorter piece that her editor had cut by 400 words in a way she still thought was a mistake. Callum Voss looked up from the menu. He did not look surprised to see her. That was the detail she would return to, later, many times. You're Naomi Chen, he said. You're Callum Voss, she said, because apparently they were establishing facts. He indicated the empty chair with the economy of someone who did not waste motion. Would you like to sit down? I'd like to understand what's happening first. You won a charity raffle, he said. You're having dinner with a stranger. A pause, measured and deliberate. Though I suppose I'm not entirely a stranger. You are the third most recognizable technology executive in the country. Third, he agreed, with a precision that implied he had considered the methodology used to arrive at the ranking. Which means this is not a blind date with a stranger. This is a very carefully constructed situation. He looked at her. He had the eyes of someone who spent considerably more time observing than being observed, and he was observing her now with a quality of attention that was not uncomfortable but was complete. She had the sense that he was taking her seriously, which was not something that happened automatically in rooms like this. "Sit down, Ms. Chen," he said. "The bread really is exceptional." Naomi sat down. She sat because she was a journalist, and journalists did not leave extraordinary situations when they could stay inside them. She sat because the bread, which had appeared at the table with the silent inevitability of excellent service, smelled like something she wanted. She sat mostly because she was already thinking about the article. "Tell me how this raffle works," she said, placing her napkin in her lap with deliberateness. "Profiles are submitted. A winner is selected. That is the structure, yes. And you're on the other end of this." "I am." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. She got the sense it was not a comfortable question, not because he was evasive, but because he was unused to being asked the simple ones. "That," he said finally, "is the most interesting question I've been asked in several months." Naomi picked up the bread. "Then this is already the best date you've had in several months." Something moved at the corner of his expression. Barely visible. The precondition of a smile. They ordered. The wine was a Burgundy that Naomi had no framework for evaluating, but which tasted, she thought, like the word unhurried. She drank it carefully, which was to say she paid attention to it, because paying attention was her primary professional skill and she had never learned how to turn it off. Callum had answered several of her questions already, which was more than she had expected. He was precise in his answers, not evasive, but each response ended exactly at the boundary of what he had decided to share. She recognized this quality from years of interviews. His candor had edges. "The raffle," she said, returning to it, because she was a journalist and she returned to things. "Profiles were submitted by nominees. How are profiles evaluated?" He considered the question visibly. "There are certain indicators. Genuine engagement with the charitable cause rather than with the prize. Responses to open-ended questions that suggest actual intellectual curiosity rather than a performance of it. The absence of an obvious agenda. So someone is vetting the profiles." "I am." She looked at him directly. "You personally read the profiles?" "I did." "All of them?" "There were 37. Naomi set her wine glass down. Callum Voss, who runs a company with 11,000 employees and sits on the board of 3 international foundations, personally read 37 charity raffle profiles and selected a winner. "Yes. That's either very touching or very troubling." "It could be both," he said, and there was the first real trace of lightness she had heard from him. "What was in your profile?" She almost said she didn't know what was in it, because she hadn't written it herself. She stopped. She did not want to give him that information yet. She wasn't sure why yet. "Why don't you tell me?" she said instead. He looked at her again with that quality of complete attention, not invasive but thorough. "Your profile described someone who had turned down 3 higher-paying positions in the past 2 years to stay at a publication she believed was doing necessary work. It mentioned that she argues with her editor in the margins of every draft and is usually right. It described someone who spent 11 months on a story about groundwater contamination in 3 counties and did it because the story mattered, not because it would generate meaningful traffic." Naomi was quiet. Priya, she thought. Priya had written all of that. Priya had described her the way a very loyal and slightly reckless friend describes someone they love, with the specific details that would have taken years to accumulate, details that assembled, laid out this way, into a portrait of someone worth knowing. She would be embarrassed about this later. And those were the indicators, Naomi said. Intellectual curiosity. Genuine engagement. Absence of agenda. Your profile didn't read like someone trying to win something, he said. It read like someone who didn't know she was being entered and wouldn't have entered herself. That's accurate. I know. Which means you selected me specifically because I didn't want to be here. He tilted his head slightly. Not quite in agreement. I selected you because your profile suggested you would be honest with me. And I have been, in recent experience, in short supply of honesty. She looked at him. He was not performing vulnerability. He was stating a fact about his life the way someone states a fact about weather or distance. She had interviewed enough public figures to know the difference, and the difference was enormous. What does your life look like ordinarily? She asked. When you're not at charity dinners. Meetings, he said. Board calls. Quarterly reviews. Investors who require managing. Negotiations with regulators. My sister, who calls on Sunday evenings and is the only person in my life who is reliably unkind to me, which I mean entirely as a compliment. Your sister is unkind to you. My sister is honest with me, which other people are not. It reads as unkindness because honesty has become unusual in that register. He paused. I'm aware of how that sounds. It sounds like a very wealthy, very isolated man. Yes, he said, without resentment. That's accurate. She thought about the 11,000 employees. The boards, the foundations, the investors who required managing. She thought about being at the center of that much structure and still being isolated inside it, the way a very loud room can still be a lonely one. What do you actually want? She asked. Not from tonight. In general. He was quiet for longer this time. Long enough that she thought he might redirect toward the menu or toward some more manageable topic. To build something that matters, he said finally, and to have someone to talk to about it who will tell me when I'm wrong. She looked at him. He was not looking away. That's a very specific answer, she said. You asked a specific question. She picked up her wine again. Outside the restaurant's tall windows, the city moved in its usual way, indifferent and continuous. This dinner, she said. How many of these have you done through the raffle? This is the first one. She set the glass down. You've never met a raffle winner before. No. Then how did you know you would want to? He looked at her steadily. I didn't, he said. Until I read your profile. She didn't answer that. She looked at the menu instead, which offered 17 options that cost more than her weekly grocery budget, and she decided to order the fish because it seemed least likely to present her with an experience she would embarrass herself during. But she kept thinking about what he'd said. About her profile. About Priya's careful and generous and unauthorized description of her. About the fact that he had read 37 profiles and selected hers, and that he had done it, apparently, because it sounded like a person who was real. The article, she thought, was going to be considerably more complicated than she had planned. They talked through 3 courses. This surprised her, because she had not expected to want to stay. She had expected one efficient, professionally useful hour followed by material for approximately 800 words on performative philanthropy. Instead she found herself, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, no longer cataloging his answers as evidence but simply listening to them. Callum Voss had opinions. Not the managed, message-trained opinions of someone whose communications department had worked them over carefully, but actual convictions and preferences and irritations, delivered with the flatness of someone who had not spent much time worrying about how they would be received. He thought the current consensus on battery technology was 15 years behind where it needed to be. He thought urban planning was the most underrated form of social infrastructure and that most cities were still designing for human behavior that had not existed for decades. He thought restaurant menus were too long and that excess choice was a specific form of cruelty, and he said this while eating at a restaurant where the menu had been 17 items and he had clearly ordered without looking at it. "You've been here before," she said. "Several times. Does the menu change?" "Seasonally." "And you've memorized it?" "I pay attention to things I return to," he said. Naomi noted this in the mental file she kept on everything. She filed it under character, subcategory, not incidental. "Tell me about the Meridian," he said. "Your publication." "It's a digital magazine. Founded 9 years ago by a woman named Audrey Prescott, who believed there was a real audience for long-form narrative journalism that didn't require readers to already be wealthy or already be convinced that the world was structured exactly as they expected." Naomi paused. "We've been right about the audience. We've been wrong about the revenue model. 3 times. And you're still there. Still there." 3 better-paying offers declined. He had, she realized, remembered everything from her profile. "I got genuinely good offers," she said. "Twice from publications with larger audiences, better benefits, considerably more institutional stability. I said no both times." "Why?" She considered the version she gave in interviews and grant applications, about accountability journalism and mission alignment and the particular importance of publications not beholden to advertisers with interests to protect. All of it was true. It wasn't the full answer. "Because I wrote a story there once," she said instead, "about a neighborhood in this city where the groundwater had been contaminated for 11 years. A small neighborhood. The kind that did not typically appear in publications that prioritized readers with disposable income." She looked at her plate. "We ran it at 4,000 words. It took 11 months. We spent more money reporting it than it generated in traffic revenue. Did anything change because of it?" "Eventually. Not quickly. But eventually." She looked up. "Most things that matter operate on an eventually timeline. That's not a reason to stop." He watched her while she said this. She could feel the attention without looking directly at him. "You're very serious about your work," he said. "From what I've read, so are you." "What have you read?" 3 major pieces on Voss Technologies and its environmental division. The profile of you in global commerce, which I thought was generous to the point of imprecision. The feature in Architectural Review, which was better. And your statements from the last 4 earnings calls, which I found interesting because the gap between what you emphasized and what the analysts focused on was considerable. He went still in a way that was different from his ordinary stillness. "What was the gap?" "You kept returning to water purification infrastructure in mid-sized cities. The analysts kept redirecting to lithium alternatives. You answered their questions and then came back to water. Every call, without fail. And you were doing it deliberately. You have a project you care about that your investors don't care about yet, and you're building the language for it incrementally, call by call, so that when you eventually need them to understand it, you've already established the vocabulary." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. "That's accurate," he said. "I know." The almost smile again. She was beginning to understand it as his version of what other people expressed more completely and less precisely. They finished the main course. The restaurant had quieted around them the way restaurants do when evening shifts from its middle into its later hours, and the energy moves from people arriving toward people deciding not to leave. Naomi became aware, at some point, that she had stopped thinking about the article. This was unusual. She did not, as a rule, stop thinking about the article. The dessert came without either of them ordering it, 2 small plates of something dark and cold that she ate without reading the description. It was extraordinary. She said so. "The chef takes the final course very seriously," he said. "Do you know the chef?" "I know everyone here," he said, without pride, "the way you state a plain fact. It's a consequence of returning to places." She looked at him. The warm light of the room made him look slightly less like a photograph and more like a person. She had been, she realized, conducting an interview for 2 hours. Somewhere in the last 20 minutes, she had stopped. "This was not what I expected," she said, when the plates had been cleared. "What did you expect?" "I expected to be bored," she said honestly. "I was prepared to be polite and efficient and leave with enough material for 800 words about performative philanthropy among the ultra-wealthy. And now?" She looked at him. "Now I think the story is more complicated." "Is that good or bad?" "In journalism," she said, "complicated is almost always better." He nodded slowly, like someone accepting information that was neither good nor bad but simply real. They left at 10:40. He walked her to the street. The night was cold and clean at its edges. A car sat at the curb, dark and waiting. "I'd like to see you again," he said. Not a question. "I know," she said. Not an answer. She walked toward the subway and did not look back, which was how she knew she wanted to. 3 days passed. Naomi wrote 400 words of an article she kept deleting and restarting, which was not her typical relationship with drafts. She opened the Hearts and Horizons website twice without particular purpose. She looked up Callum Voss on 2 separate occasions, which she rationalized as background research, and then closed the browser each time because she recognized the difference between research and what she was actually doing. On the 4th day, she received an email from a woman named Harriet who identified herself as executive assistant to Mr. Voss and who wrote with the polished efficiency of someone who dispatched 50 emails before most people finished their first cup of coffee. The email said that the Hearts and Horizons Foundation was hosting a site visit to one of its supported community programs on Thursday afternoon, and that Mr. Voss had thought Ms. Chen might find it relevant given her interest in civic journalism. If she were available, a car could be arranged. Naomi replied that she could arrange her own transportation, "Thank you." Harriet's response came back in under 4 minutes. "Of course." 2 o'clock. The address followed. The community center was in a neighborhood 12 miles from downtown, in a converted warehouse space with inadequate parking and excellent bones, run by a woman named Gloria whose handshake carried 30 years of authority built without waiting for permission. The Hearts and Horizons Foundation funded after-school arts programming here. Children made things with their hands, ceramics and screen printing and woodworking, with the purposeful absorption that children bring to activities that have not yet been assigned a grade. Callum was already there when Naomi arrived. He was not in the suit he'd worn at Aurelius. He was in dark trousers and a plain jacket, sitting at a worktable beside a 9-year-old who was attempting to center clay on a pottery wheel with the concentrated intensity of someone diffusing something. "Don't fight it," Callum was saying, with a patience she had not expected from him. "You're stronger than it is, so when you fight it, it knows you don't trust it." "Clay doesn't know anything," the child said, without looking up. "You'd be surprised." Naomi stood in the doorway for a moment. Callum noticed her without turning, in the way that people accustomed to managing rooms notice peripheral changes without needing to look directly at them. "Ms. Chen," he said. "Mr. Voss. Interesting venue for a second meeting. You said you preferred not to use my car." "I prefer to make my own arrangements. Generally." He looked at her then, and she recognized what she had catalogued as the almost smile precondition, slightly more developed than before. The child at the wheel successfully centered the clay and made a small, fierce sound of satisfaction. Gloria gave Naomi a tour, which Naomi took seriously and Callum followed from a quiet distance. The programming was genuinely good, structured enough to produce real skills and loose enough to produce real confidence, and Naomi found herself asking questions not because she was building material but because she actually wanted to know. Gloria answered with the directness of someone who had been undersold and overdelivered for years and no longer found the pattern surprising. "The foundation came in 3 years ago," Gloria said. "When we were 2 months from closing." "And Mr. Voss specifically?" Gloria glanced across the room to where Callum was watching 2 children compare their finished pieces, listening to their explanation with full and unhurried attention. "He shows up," Gloria said simply. "Not constantly. But regularly. And when he does, he doesn't talk much. He just watches." She paused. In my experience, that means someone is paying attention. Not building a photo opportunity. Actually paying attention. She looked at Naomi. That's rarer than money. Later, in the parking lot, a light rain began the way uncertain rain does, not yet committed to itself. You fund this because you care about it, Naomi said. Yes. Not for the press. There is very little press in watching a 9-year-old center clay. There's press in the foundation name and the charity dinner. The foundation needs external funding, he said. The dinner is a mechanism for that. The pottery room is the reason the mechanism exists. He looked at her levelly. Those are different things. Naomi thought about this. The apparatus versus the purpose. How often they collapse together in public perception. Why journalism? He asked, while she was still thinking. Because things happen that shouldn't, and most of them happen because no one is watching closely enough, she said. If someone watches and writes it down, sometimes it changes. Not always, and rarely quickly. But sometimes. He nodded. That's similar to why I fund water purification research. Not because it's profitable in the short term. Because things go wrong with water and no one notices until it's already too late to prevent the damage. She looked at him. The rain was more committed now. You should probably come back inside, he said. Probably, she agreed. They went back inside, where Gloria was explaining to someone on the phone why the plumbing budget was not, in fact, a discretionary line item, and Naomi sat at a work table and watched Callum help a girl named Renata troubleshoot a print that wasn't registering correctly, talking her through the problem with patient specificity, listening to her suggestions before offering his own. She drove herself home. She reopened the article draft. This time, she wrote 600 words before deleting any of them. The article was supposed to be 800 words on the performative nature of billionaire philanthropy. Naomi had pitched it to her editor Bernard 3 weeks earlier, before the raffle, before Aurelius, before a 9-year-old had successfully centered clay while Callum Voss sat beside her with more patience than his public profile suggested he possessed. Bernard had approved the pitch with the enthusiasm of an editor who saw traffic in the headline and trusted Naomi's bylines to fill the rest responsibly. She was now on draft 4. It was 1,400 words. It was not the article she had pitched. The problem was precision. She was attempting to be precise about something that was not behaving with precision. The line between philanthropic performance and genuine intent was supposed to be clear. She had believed this when she pitched it, had identified multiple examples of wealthy individuals whose charitable activity existed primarily as image management, had 3 quotes from a nonprofit governance researcher who used the phrase philanthropic theater without apology. The architecture of the piece was solid. The foundation, however, had shifted. Because Callum Voss did not fit the frame. This was, she told herself with professional firmness, not a romantic problem. It was a journalistic one. She was not adjusting the article because she had feelings. She was adjusting it because the evidence required adjustment, and she was not the kind of writer who bent evidence to serve a preconceived argument. She had a professional reputation that she was far more loyal to than she was to any pitch. She arranged a 3rd meeting through Harriet, telling her she had additional questions about the foundation's grant structure for background research. This was true. It was not the complete truth. The complete truth was that she wanted to see the Environmental Technology Laboratory, which she had read about and had not yet been able to access. He said yes to the lab visit. She had not been certain he would. Voss Technology's primary research facility was in an industrial district east of the city, in the kind of area where old manufacturing plants had been converted by companies that needed large, well-lit spaces and proximity to nothing except the highway. The facility was 3 floors of controlled climate and focused people who moved with the urgency of those who believed their work could not wait. Callum met her at the entrance. He was in work mode, which was different from the dinner version of him and different again from the community center version. Precise, quick in his movements, introducing her to researchers with the fluency of someone who actually knew what each person was working on. The water purification project was on the second floor. It was more complicated and considerably more interesting than she had understood from earnings calls and public statements. They were not developing filtration technology. They were developing monitoring infrastructure, systems that could identify contamination signatures in municipal water supplies in real time, before the thresholds that triggered regulatory response were reached. The regulatory thresholds, she said, standing before a display showing water quality data from a city she was not permitted to identify, are the problem. The thresholds are set for what's legally acceptable, said Dr. Van Park, the project's lead researcher, a woman who had developed the patient vocabulary of someone who had explained her work to investors many times. Not for what's actually safe for human health over time. There's a meaningful gap between those two things. And your system catches what lives in the gap. That's the objective. Naomi looked at the data. She thought about her water story. The 11 months. The small neighborhood. The gap between legal and safe, which was another way of saying the gap between what the law required and what people deserved, which was a gap she had written about and which still lived somewhere in her chest the way certain stories did. Why aren't your investors more enthusiastic about this? She asked Callum, once Dr. Park had moved to answer something else. Municipal contract revenue cycles are long, he said. Years to negotiate, years to implement. That's not a growth narrative for investors who think in quarters. But you keep funding it anyway. Yes. Even when it doesn't serve the growth story. I have other divisions that serve the growth story, he said. This serves something different. She looked at him. He was watching the data display, not her. It serves the thing you actually care about, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I grew up in a city where there was a water problem, he said. Not dramatic. Not a contamination event that made headlines. Just water that tasted wrong for years, and people who assumed it was normal because they had nothing else to compare it to. The problem was identified and corrected when I was 11. A pause. I still remember when the water changed. Everyone noticed the absence of something bad that they hadn't known was bad. Naomi wrote this down. Not for the article. For herself. On the drive back to her apartment, she opened the draft and added 3 paragraphs that had nothing to do with philanthropic theater and everything to do with what it looked like when someone used accumulated resources to address a problem they had personally understood for a long time. The article was now 1,900 words. She sent Bernard a message saying she needed additional time. His reply arrived within minutes. How much? She replied, a week. He sent back a single question mark. She stared at it, and then she closed the message and started writing again. Priya brought coffee to Naomi's desk on a Thursday morning and sat across from her with the expression of someone who had prepared for a difficult conversation and had committed to having it. How's the article? Priya asked. Long, said Naomi. I heard you've been back to see him. Naomi did not ask how Priya heard this. Priya heard everything. It was her most consistent quality, alongside her enthusiasm for entering people into raffles without informing them. I've been doing research, Naomi said. You went to his lab. Background on the charitable foundation requires understanding the company's broader mission architecture. Naomi. Priya. Are you okay? Naomi stopped typing. She turned to look at Priya directly, which she didn't always do during working hours because Priya's face was extremely expressive and looking at it required full engagement. I want to ask you something, she said. Yes. The profile you submitted for the raffle. Priya's expression moved through several stages quickly. Yes, she said, now careful. What did you write? A pause. I wrote the truth about you. Specifically. Priya looked at her hands. I wrote that you had turned down 3 jobs that paid more because you believed in what you were doing. I wrote that you argue with Bernard in the margins of every draft and that you're usually right but you never say so afterward, which is why he keeps letting you do it. I wrote about the water story. She looked up. I wrote that you were the most honest person I knew and that you deserve to be known by more people than currently knew you. Naomi was quiet. I know I should have asked, Priya said. You should have asked. You would have said no. Yes. And that's exactly why I didn't ask. She said it gently, with the specific directness of someone who loved a person enough to occasionally do things that person would not like. You say no to things that are good for you because good things require you to be exposed, and you don't like being exposed. You prefer to observe. You prefer to understand things before you become part of them. She paused. He read your profile and wanted to meet you. That's not nothing, Naomi. Naomi looked at her desk. He selected it, she said. The selection wasn't random. Did he tell you that? No. But someone who reviewed 37 profiles selected mine, and probability is not doing that work. Someone made a specific choice. She paused. And I don't know what to do with that. Priya was quiet for a moment. I think you do know, she said finally. I think you know exactly what to do. I think you're scared. Naomi did not deny this. She picked up her coffee instead. That afternoon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered with the professional wariness of someone who had not expected the call. Ms. Chen, said Callum Voss, who had a voice like a weather forecast, informative and utterly indifferent to your feelings about the information it contained. I understand you've been spending time with my brother. I've been doing research for an article. Yes. That's what he says too. A pause. I've known my brother for 33 years. I've watched him give foundation tours to journalists. I've watched him answer questions about water purification infrastructure for reporters who were genuinely interested in the technology. I have not, before this month, heard him mention a journalist's name twice in the same casual conversation. Naomi said nothing. He mentioned that you noticed the earnings calls, Delia said. The water project and the way he redirects from the battery technology questions. He found that genuinely amusing. Callum does not find things amusing. He finds them accurate or inaccurate, useful or not useful. Amusing is a new register for him. I'm not sure what you're telling me, Naomi said carefully. I'm telling you that my brother is lonely in a way that a considerable amount of structure and purpose has not solved, Delia said, in the same weather forecast tone. He set up this raffle because his communications team told him his public profile was too cold and he agreed because it also benefited the foundation. He read 37 profiles because he takes every task seriously and correctly. He selected yours because it was the only one that read like an actual person who was not trying to win something. She paused. I'm telling you this because you seem like someone who values having accurate information before making decisions. I do, Naomi said. Good. Then here's accurate information, don't be foolish about this. She said it without heat. Simply. My brother doesn't charm people. He doesn't know how to charm people. If he's showing you things he cares about, it's because he cares about you. That's the full mechanism. It's not complicated and it's not a strategy. The call ended. Naomi sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. Then she opened the draft and added a new section that had nothing to do with philanthropic theater or foundation grant structures or water purification infrastructure. She marked it clearly in the document, not for publication. Personal notes only. She was a journalist. She knew the difference between what she was writing for and what she was writing toward. She was no longer certain the difference was as large as she needed it to be. They met on a Saturday, the first time without a stated purpose. No foundation, no lab, no article architecture providing a frame for the meeting. Callum had suggested it in a message that was brief to the point of near opacity. Saturday. The park on Aldine. 10. Naomi had replied okay with the deliberateness of someone who had considered 12 other responses before selecting the one that committed the least and still said yes. The park on Aldine was a city park in an ordinary neighborhood, not a destination but the kind of space that existed for the people who lived beside it, dogs and strollers and teenagers sitting on the footbridge railings with the proprietary ease of people who have claimed a location. Callum was standing near the east entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at a tree with the same quality of attention he brought to everything else. She was not going to be charmed by a man looking at a tree. She arrived already having established this. "You're exactly on time," she said. "Punctuality is an underrated courtesy," he said. "What were you looking at?" He glanced back at the tree. "It's a London plane. An old one. They planted them in this part of the city in the 1880s as part of an urban greening initiative. Most of them were removed over the following century but a few survived in protected spaces." She looked at the tree with new attention. "You know about urban trees. I told you I cared about urban planning." They walked. The morning was cool and bright, the kind of morning that made the city look like a deliberate design rather than an accumulation of decisions. He walked at her pace, which was not a small thing. Many people didn't. "Tell me something about yourself that isn't in the public record," she said. He considered the question for a full block. "I can't sleep on planes," he said. "It has been a significant professional inconvenience. I've tried everything including the expensive solutions. I read instead, which means I now have strong opinions about airports ranked by the quality of their bookshops. Which airport is best? Helsinki, without question. Singapore if you want range in Mandarin. Schiphol for sheer volume. Which is worst? Several American airports that I won't name because I was in them during events that were not their fault and it wouldn't be fair." She smiled before she had decided whether to. "What else?" "I cook badly but with considerable enthusiasm. I've broken 3 stand mixers over the years. I keep the 4th behind glass as a motivator." "What do you cook badly?" "Pasta. Bread. Anything that requires patience with timing." He glanced sideways at her. "And you?" "Something not in your published bylines." "I run in the mornings," she said. "Not for fitness. Because it's the only time of day where I'm permitted to think without having to produce anything from the thinking." "Permitted by whom?" She considered this. "By myself, I suppose." They had reached the footbridge. A large dog had decided it was finished moving and lay in the center of the path with the implacability of someone who had run the relevant calculations and found them favorable. They waited while the dog's owner conducted a polite and unsuccessful negotiation. "Do you think about the water story still?" he asked, when they had passed the dog. "Occasionally. Not the way I did while I was inside it. More the way you think about something you needed to do and did." She paused. "Does that sound strange?" "No. I think about the first city that agreed to pilot the monitoring system. Every time I check the data." "What do you look for?" "Everything," he said. "But mostly I check that the gap is narrowing." She looked at him. They had stopped walking without planning to, standing at the edge of the park near a low stone wall where someone had left a coffee cup and a paperback, as though they had meant to return. "I'm not sure the article I'm writing is the one I planned to write," she said. "What article did you plan?" "About philanthropic theater. About the difference between charitable activity as social signaling and charitable activity as actual intention. About how to tell them apart when the external presentation can look identical." "And now?" She was quiet for a moment. Around them the park was filling with its Saturday morning population, dogs and children and people with coffee moving at the pace of people who had nowhere specific to be. "Now I think the more interesting question is what happens when the intention is genuinely real," she said. "And whether that's rare enough to write about or whether I only think it's rare because I've been looking in the wrong places." He looked at her. "What made you look somewhere different?" She did not answer immediately. She was aware of the answer and aware of what it cost to give it and aware that she was standing at an edge that could not be uncrossed. "You didn't perform," she said at last. "At the dinner, at the community center, at the lab. You weren't performing anything. You were just present. Paying attention to the actual thing in front of you rather than to the impression you were making." She paused. "I've interviewed a great many people who are paying close attention to the impression they're making. You were paying attention to the real thing. It's a different quality entirely." He looked at her for a long time. "I was paying attention to you," he said, quietly. The park moved around them, unhurried and indifferent. "I know," she said. "That's the part one can't write around." He reached out and touched her hand, the way people do when they are being careful, not a grasp but a contact, a question asked through touch. She looked down at his hand and then up at his face. "I'm not good at this," she said. "Allowing things to be uncertain while I'm inside them." "Neither am I," he said. They stood there, the city filling in around them on all sides, and for a moment neither of them resolved anything, which was the most honest thing they had done. The story ran in a tabloid called The Register on a Tuesday morning, and Naomi read it on her phone on the subway with a coffee that had already gone wrong. The headline was, "Billionaire rigged charity raffle, personally chose winner based on online profile." 470 words. Two anonymous sources described as people familiar with the Hearts and Horizons Foundation. Callum's name in the first sentence, hers in the third. A photograph of Aurelius with the caption "Exclusive dinner venue," and a photograph of Naomi taken at a journalism conference 2 years earlier, in which she looked focused and mildly argumentative. She got off one stop early and walked the remaining distance because she needed to be moving. The thing about being written about when you were a writer was that you understood exactly what decisions had been made. She could see the structure clearly, which details had been selected and which excluded, where passive construction was used to imply something without bearing the responsibility of stating it. The story implied, without stating, that Naomi had known the raffle was not random. It implied that her subsequent research visits had been part of a coordinated arrangement between them. None of this was asserted. All of it was present. She sat at her desk for 2 hours before calling him. He picked up on the second ring. "I read it," she said. "I know." His voice was measured, but not in the communications-trained way. In the way of someone working carefully to be precise. "I want to explain. Please. I read 37 profiles. Yours was the only one that didn't read as a performance. Not the best writing, not the most compelling personal narrative. The only one that read like a person who wasn't trying to win anything." He paused. "I selected it because I wanted to meet you. I told myself it was because the foundation should prioritize genuine participants over performative ones, which is true and which I believe. But I also selected it because I wanted to meet you, which was a separate reason that I did not fully acknowledge to myself until you walked into that restaurant and looked at me like you were already working out what was true." She was quiet. "I should have told you," he said. "Yes. I didn't because I didn't know how to tell you without it sounding like exactly what it looks like in that piece." "What does it look like?" "Like a powerful person using a charitable apparatus to engineer a personal outcome," he said, directly and without softening it. "Which is, structurally, what happened. The reason behind it is different. But the structure is the same, and I knew that when I made the decision, and I didn't know how to explain the difference without sounding like someone managing his own narrative." "Are you managing your narrative?" "I'm on the phone with you the morning after a tabloid story," he said. "If I were managing my narrative, I would be talking to my communications director and not answering when you called." She processed this. "I feel exposed," she said. "That article implies I knew. People who know my work professionally are going to read it and draw conclusions about whether my research was actually research or whether I had a different agenda. My professional integrity is not collateral damage I'm able to absorb for someone else's situation." "I know," he said. "So what are you going to do?" He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to tell the truth. Publicly, in my own words, with specificity. That I selected the profile. That it was not an act of cynical manipulation but of genuine interest. That the donation to the Children's Arts Initiative was real and independent of any personal calculation. That everything that followed was also real. And me? What does your statement say about me? That you had no knowledge of the selection process, he said. That everything you've done subsequently has been your own work, your own research, your own conclusions, arrived at independently. That doesn't fully correct the implication. No, he said. But it's what I can do that's true. She sat with the phone pressed to her ear. She could hear the quality of his listening, even in silence. I need time, she said. Okay. I'm not saying this is finished. Okay. I'm saying I need to sit with this before I know what I think. Okay, he said again. The word, she had learned, contained many things for him. Among them, reliably, that he was still there. She ended the call. She placed her phone face down on her desk. Bernard appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. He had clearly read the article. His expression carried the specific neutral quality of a man who had opinions and was determining the appropriate sequence in which to offer them. The article, he said. I know, she said. Are you all right? She looked at him. He had edited her work for 4 years. He had cut her favorite paragraph from the water story and been correct to do it, which she had acknowledged internally and never fully said aloud. He asked this question now with the directness of someone who actually wanted the answer. I don't know yet, she said honestly. He nodded once, accepting this, and left her to work. The draft sat at 2,300 words for 4 days. Naomi opened it every morning and read it and closed it again, the way you handle something that is not finished but is also not broken, waiting with the particular patience of someone who has learned to trust that the right ending comes when the work has earned it. On the 5th day, she deleted 1,100 words and started the middle section entirely over. The article she had pitched to Bernard was dead. It had died somewhere between a pottery room in a converted warehouse and a park on Aldine and a phone call on a Tuesday morning in which someone told her the truth clearly and without protective distance, which was not something that happened often enough in her professional experience to be easy to write around. What she was writing instead was harder. It did not have the clean architecture she had planned, the setup of a trope, the evidence against it, the clear takeaway sentence that readers could carry away and repeat. What it had instead was a question, and the question was, what do we do with philanthropy that is real? Not mechanically compliant, not legally generous in a way that served other interests, but motivated by something the person actually carried? What was the honest story about the distance between what institutions permitted and what people deserved, and what happened when someone with the resources to address that distance decided to? She was writing about water. About children learning to center clay on wheels in a converted warehouse. About an earnings call in which a man kept redirecting toward the thing he genuinely cared about while his investors kept asking about something adjacent and more profitable. She was, in her personal notes, also writing about being known. About the strange discomfort of being described accurately by someone who had read 37 other people's profiles and found hers worth selecting. About the difference between being observed and being seen, which she had been trying to articulate precisely for years and which had become, since a Friday night at Aurelius, both clearer and more personal than she had expected anything to be. She did not include the personal notes in the article. She included the question. On the same Thursday morning that she sent the final draft to Bernard, who replied within 40 minutes with the single word yes that she had learned to recognize as his highest editorial register, Callum Voss published a statement. She didn't know about it until Priya forwarded it with a message that said only, read this. The statement was posted on the Voss Technologies website and mirrored on the Hearts and Horizons Foundation page. It was 6 paragraphs. No corporate language, no media training syntax, none of the smooth passive constructions that press releases use to say things without saying them. It stated that the charity raffle selection had not been random, that he had personally reviewed the submitted profiles and selected a winner whose profile he had found compelling, and that this had not been disclosed to the winner at the time. It said that the charitable donation to the Children's Arts Initiative was genuine and independent of any personal outcome from the evening. It said that the foundation's work was real, that the people who ran it were extraordinary, and that none of them deserved to have that work associated with something that appeared, without context, to be a manipulation. And then it said, in the 5th paragraph, that the person whose profile he had selected had subsequently done 3 weeks of genuine journalistic research into the foundation and the company's environmental work, had asked harder questions than his own communications team had ever asked him, and had arrived at conclusions he considered more accurate than anything previously written about it. That whatever the mechanism of their meeting, everything that followed had been real on every side. And that he was sorry she had been placed in a position that raised questions about the integrity of work she had earned honestly. He did not name her. He also did not conceal who he was describing. Anyone who had read the tabloid piece would know immediately. Naomi sat with her phone and read the statement 3 times. She had written an article that told the truth about what she had found. He had published a statement that told the truth about what had happened. Neither of them had known, when they sat down to do these things, that the other one was doing it at the same time. She thought about this for a long time. She thought about the word simultaneously, about 2 people in separate places choosing to be honest at the same moment without consulting each other, without coordinating, without certainty that the other one was going to do the same. She thought about what that meant as evidence, about the difference between deciding to trust someone and discovering that trust had already been operating quietly without requiring a decision. Her phone rang. Priya. Are you reading it? Priya said. Yes. Naomi. I know. He didn't have to do that. No, she said. He didn't. So, she agreed. She hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she put on her jacket, picked up her keys, and made a decision she was making not because she had enough information or because the risk had been adequately reduced, but because sometimes you did not wait for certainty. Sometimes you moved toward the thing, with all the uncertainty that implied, because the alternative was to stay still and call it wisdom when it was actually only fear. She called him from the street outside her building, because she needed to be moving and the apartment felt too stationary for what she was carrying. He picked up after 1 ring. I read your statement, she said. I read your article, he said, which was how she learned that Bernard had published it that same morning, which was also simultaneous, which was also something she would think about carefully for a long time afterward. You read it. Harriet flagged it. She reads everything. A pause. It's the most accurate piece that's been written about the water project. And about the foundation. Another pause. And about several other things. I wrote what I found, she said. I know. That's what I meant. She was walking north without a destination fixed, moving in the direction of the park on Aldine because that had become, over recent weeks, the place she associated with things becoming clearer. Your statement didn't name me, she said. No. But it defended me. Yes. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. I did it because it was true and because you deserved to have the truth stated by the person responsible for the part that wasn't your doing. She walked. A dog passed her on the sidewalk, its owner scrolling a phone and trusting the leash. A child on a bicycle swerved around her with unnecessary drama and absolute confidence in the outcome. The city moved in its usual way, full of the ordinary urgency of people with places to be. I'm scared, she said. Not as a confession. As information. Of what specifically? Of this being something I can't step back from comfortably. She kept walking. I've been very careful, for a long time, about what I allow to matter to me. Not because I'm cold. Because when things genuinely matter to me, they really matter, and that has consequences when other people are involved. What does being careful look like for you? Knowing more than I reveal, she said. Observing. Understanding things fully before I become part of them. And now? Now I'm part of something I don't fully understand yet, she said. And I haven't left. That's unusual for me. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear the quality of his listening, which she had come to recognize as its own form of presence. I read 37 profiles, he said. Yours was the one where I understood, before the end of the first paragraph, that the person who had been described was someone who would tell me the truth even when it was uncomfortable for both of us. He paused. I have a life that is full of people who tell me things are fine. I have an extensive amount of evidence that things being fine is not the same as things being real. She stopped walking. She was at the east entrance to the park, the same entrance where he had been standing looking at the London plane tree on a Saturday morning that felt both recent and long ago. I'm at the park, she said. A pause. I know, he said. I'm at the other entrance. She turned. Across the long diagonal of the park, past the footbridge and the Saturday morning families and a dog that appeared to be the same dog as before, still horizontal and still committed to its position, she could see a figure in a dark jacket standing at the far side. She was a journalist. She was trained to ask questions before drawing conclusions. She walked toward him anyway. They met in the middle, near the footbridge, in the way that people who have been moving toward each other arrive, slightly breathless, slightly more themselves than they had been on the way over, uncertain of the exact right thing to say. You published the statement without telling me, she said. You published the article without telling me, he said. She considered this. We were both being honest at the same time. Yes. Without coordinating. Yes. That's interesting, she said. I thought so too, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The park moved around them, the families and children and dogs and the London plane tree standing in its particular November light, having survived 17 decades of city growth and not requiring acknowledgement of the fact. I'm not easy, she said. I ask too many questions and I think too much and I am professionally trained to be skeptical of things that appear convenient. I know. I read your profile. And I have a career that is genuinely important to me and that I will not compromise. You've declined 3 better offers to protect it, he said. I noted that. And I need to make my own decisions. You drove yourself to the community center, he said. I noticed that specifically. She looked at him. The almost smile. The quality of attention that she had spent weeks trying to characterize precisely and had not quite managed. You're not going to list all the reasons this is inadvisable, she said. It's probably inadvisable, he said. You're a journalist who has been writing about my work, which creates a real conflict of interest that you will need to disclose fully. I selected you from a charity raffle in a way I did not disclose at the time. We have known each other for less than a month. My sister will have detailed opinions. My father's attorneys will have different detailed opinions. And Bernard will have specific opinions about journalistic ethics, though I notice he published the article. He published it because it was good, she said. Yes, he said. It was. She took a breath. The monitoring system. The pilot city. Yes. Is the gap narrowing? He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted into something warmer and less guarded than what she had grown accustomed to seeing. Slowly, he said. But measurably. She nodded. She thought about slowly and measurably. About how much she trusted evidence over declaration. About the difference between something being said and something being demonstrated over time. She reached out and put her hand in his, because it was the clearest statement available to her and she was someone who valued clarity above most things. He did not look surprised. He held on. Around them the park went about its business, indifferent and patient and full of its ordinary Saturday life. The dog remained horizontal on the footbridge. The children ran. The tree stood where it had stood for a century and a half, surviving not through drama but through the particular stubbornness of things that have put down deep enough roots. I want to write the longer piece, she said. About the water project. A real feature, with full access and full transparency about my position. 6 months of reporting, maybe more. That's a significant conflict of interest, he said. Yes. Which I will disclose completely and upfront, every relevant detail, so that readers can evaluate the work knowing the full context. He was quiet. It's a genuinely important story, she said. It deserves to be told properly, by someone who understands what they're looking at. Yes, he said, after a moment. It does. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back, which was not a complicated gesture but was, she thought, an honest one. An honesty, as she had determined some weeks ago in a restaurant that smelled of black truffle and old money, was the indicator she trusted above all others. They walked. The city did what cities do, moving and continuous and full of people choosing directions. And somewhere in an industrial district on the east side, in a laboratory where serious people moved with the urgency of those who believed their work could not wait, data points were being recorded about water and distance and the gap between legal and safe, and what it cost when no one was watching closely enough, and what it looked like when someone decided to watch. The gap was narrowing. Slowly, measurably, with the patience of work that understood it was on an eventually timeline and had decided that was not a reason to stop. That was enough to begin. Don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments below. And let us know, would you have walked across the park? Share your thoughts.